Have you ever gazed at someone you cherish and felt terror creep into your heart? Not the sweet apprehension of potentially losing something precious, but the kind of dread that makes your fingers quake when footsteps approach the door. The anxiety that forces you to weigh every syllable before speaking. The panic that jolts you awake in the darkness, heart pounding. As you pray, the steady breathing beside you continues its rhythm, confirming he still sleeps peacefully. This terror was my constant companion for nearly 10 years, while I held the most honored yet isolating position in our religious community, wife to the minister. I had once been simply Ziz, an elementary teacher who delighted children with imaginative tales. I became Sister Maria Jose, spouse of Reverend Josias, a title I bore like a crown of thorns. Now, at 85, I possess enough wrinkles to tell this tale without my voice breaking. Time grants this mercy, transforming gaping wounds into scars that ache when weather shifts, yet no longer bleed at the slightest touch. Here, settled in this armchair overlooking the waters of snow, Vicente, the same ocean that witnessed my silent torment, I wish to share how I discovered that sometimes hell exists not beneath the earth, but within a home blessed by hands that, away from congregational eyes, transformed into fists. I'm not here to drive anyone from faith. Quite the opposite, I believe in God more deeply now than when I sang hymns every Sunday, dressed in knee-length skirts with a practiced smile painted across my bruised features. I'm here to reveal how I learned to distinguish authentic faith from its manipulation as a tool of dominance and control. Perhaps, just perhaps, my words might reach someone enduring their own private hell. Disguised as paradise to outside observers, the scent of sea spray mingled with morning coffee still permeates. My memories of that house on Presidente Wilson Avenue where waves crashed against the shore while I shattered inside. Today, however, the ocean no longer brings that familiar terror. The salt water no longer resembles the tears I shed for so long. The beginning, 1972, Brazil lived under military rule, yet I existed under a different kind of dictatorship. One, imposed by my own insecurities and my mother's voice echoing through my thoughts. Maria Jose, a respectable young woman, needs a good man to call husband. At 32, I was what society labeled a spinster, a devoted teacher at Marta Mafanzo Elementary School. Though I took pride in my diploma, the absence of a wedding ring on my left hand rendered me incomplete by the era's standards. The school sat just blocks from the beach. Monday through Friday mornings, I taught children to read and write, to add and subtract, to understand their world through language. My colleagues claimed I possessed a special gift. I could calm even the most restless student with stories and songs I invented spontaneously. You were born to be a mother, Ziz, they'd say during breaks. While I smiled to mask the discomfort their well-intentioned comments stirred. Prodding at my deepest insecurity, I shared a modest inherited apartment with my younger sister Lucy, who worked as a pharmacy clerk. She insisted good men were rare commodities, that I shouldn't worry, better alone than poorly matched. She'd repeat while we flipped through magazines on Sunday evenings. Yet this didn't ease the weight of family gathering questions, pitying glances from aunts, or the empty space beside me in the Methodist church pews we'd occupied since childhood. Our routine was simple but comfortable. I taught mornings, spent afternoons, preparing materials and grading papers. Sundays after service, we'd sometimes stroll the waterfront, buying cotton candy and watching families with children running across the sand. I genuinely enjoyed my life, truly did, but there existed this hollow space, this unfulfilled expectation. This sense that perhaps I was wasting my prime years, that maybe something greater awaited me. The arrival then, I noticed activity at the abandoned furniture store. Men carried plastic chairs inside, installed a simple wooden pulpit, hung a banner, Assembly of Renewed Faith where miracles happen. A new church was coming to town, bringing with it a pastor with a deep voice and penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. Josias Pereira had recently turned 40, his black hair already thinning at the temples, possessing charisma that filled any room. He'd come from Minas Gerais, a lover of the Lord as he described himself, to bring spiritual revival to the São Paulo coast. When he spoke, people leaned forward, eager to capture every word. I, always reserved and discreet, found myself inexplicably drawn to this man who spoke of God with an intimacy I'd never encountered. The Assembly of Renewed Faith grew rapidly. Soon plastic chairs proved insufficient, and services began running in 2 sessions to accommodate everyone. Pastor Josias, as he was known, preached differently, blending biblical passages with personal stories, prosperity promises with spiritual commitment demands. It was intense, unlike anything I'd known in my former church. God doesn't want lukewarm children, he'd proclaim, pacing back and forth behind the makeshift pulpit, microphone in one hand, Bible in the other. He wants servants committed to His work willing to abandon everything to follow his will, seated always in the third row. I absorbed every word like water in a desert. The courtship I began attending not just Sundays, but Wednesdays and Fridays too. Soon I was participating in Saturday morning prayer groups, helping organize events. Lucina frowned, watching me leave home, increasingly dressed up for services. Is this pastor really that special? Or are you seeing something particular in him? She teased one evening as I tried on a new dress, modest but elegant. I blushed like a teenager and mumbled about spiritual commitment. But deep down I knew there was something more. The first sign of recognition came when Pastor Josias invited me to lead the children's Sunday school. Sister, you have experience with little ones, don't you? God showed me you have a special calling to train the next generation in the Lord's ways. His gaze met mine for several seconds, longer than necessary, and I felt my heart race like never before. Finally, someone important saw value in me. The following weeks brought gradual closeness. He sought my opinions on biblical texts for children, invited me to church planning meetings. During one such meeting, I discovered he was widowed. His wife had died 2 years prior, leaving him alone in the Lord's battle. As he said with tears in his eyes, "A godly woman is the greatest treasure a man in ministry can have," he commented while walking me to the bus stop after a late meeting. "A woman who understands the calling, who doesn't oppose the work, who's willing to sacrifice for the kingdom." Those words echoed within me for days. Could I be that woman? Did I possess this special calling to stand beside a man of God? On the day I completed 6 months as an Assembly of Renewed Faith member, Pastor Josias asked to speak with me after service. In the small back office surrounded by boxes of hymnals and evangelical pamphlet stacks, he knelt before the only chair where I sat. "Sister Maria Jose, I've sought God's face in prayer, and he clearly revealed his will to me. The Lord sent me to Snow Vicente, not only to shepherd this flock, but to find the helpmate he set apart for me. Would you accept being my wife and partner in this ministry the Lord has entrusted to us?" Tears filled my eyes. At 32, when I'd begun accepting that marriage might not be in my plans, God had sent not just a husband, but a respected man, a spiritual leader, someone who saw me as fundamental to his divine mission. "Yes, I accept," I replied with an emotional voice, never imagining that yes would become the gateway to a private hell that no sermon about trials could have prepared me for. The wedding and early days our marriage was celebrated in December 1972, 3 weeks before Christmas. The church was decorated with white flowers donated by congregation sisters and golden ribbons reminiscent of the festive season. Lucinha was my maid of honor, though with visible reluctance in her eyes. "You barely know this man, Ziz," she whispered, while helping me with the simple but elegant dress we'd bought in Santos after weeks of saving. "Marriage isn't a game." I smiled, confident in my decision. "God doesn't make mistakes, Lucinda. He placed Pastor Josias in my path for a reason." The ceremony was conducted by a pastor friend of Josias, who came specially from São Paulo for the occasion. Our honeymoon was a weekend in Santos at the Park Balneario Hotel, a luxury that made me feel like a princess. Josias was affectionate, attentive, treating me with respect that bordered on reverence. "A virtuous woman, who can find? Her worth exceeds fine jewels," he recited after our intimate moments, making me blush with the biblical compliment. The first changes we returned to begin life in a small 2-story house rented 2 blocks from the church. The first floor would receive congregation members, conduct Bible studies, and hold administrative meetings. Upstairs was our private residence living room, kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. Simple but cozy, or so I thought. The transformation wasn't abrupt. There was no single moment where I could say, this is where everything changed. It was gradual, like a tide that rises imperceptibly until suddenly you realize you're surrounded by water on all sides. The first change came a week after marriage. I was organizing my school materials for the new academic year when Josias entered the bedroom with a serious expression I didn't yet know. "Maria Jose, I've been in prayer and believe the Lord is directing me about our ministry." He sat on the bed's edge, his voice calm but definitive. "A pastor's wife has important responsibilities in the work. I don't believe you can balance school with the demands God will place on you as my helpmate." I felt as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet. "But, Josias, I love teaching. They're my children, my vocation." He took my hands in his gaze intense, fixed on me. "Your ministry is different now, dear. Proverbs 31 speaks of the virtuous woman who tends the home, serves her husband, who's available for the Lord's work. How can you meet the church's needs if you're committed to school all morning?" I argued, trying to find middle ground. I had 10 years of teaching experience, adored my students, felt I made a difference there. But for each of my arguments, Josias responded with a verse, a divine revelation. An explanation of how my resistance showed I hadn't truly understood the calling or died completely to my own will. The conversation lasted hours. When I finally yielded, emotionally and spiritually exhausted, Josias smiled with an expression I would learn to fear over time. It wasn't joy, it was satisfaction, victory. He'd won the first battle. You'll see it's God's will, Maria Jose. He will honor your obedience. The next morning, I sent my resignation letter to the elementary school. I cried silently while writing it, feeling I was surrendering not just a job, but an essential part of who I was. When I returned home after delivering the letter, Josias was waiting in the living room with a new Bible with my name engraved on the cover. Maria Jose Pereira, pastor's wife. So you can begin your new ministry with the word that guides us, he said, kissing my forehead. That Bible, which should have been a symbol of love and consideration, gradually became the manual by which my existence would be controlled and measured. And that day, that resignation letter, was the first step toward erasing the woman I had been. The gradual control the first months as Pastor Josias's wife were an emotional roller coaster. On one hand, I experienced a new feeling of importance and purpose. Churchwomen sought my advice, asked my opinions on family matters, wanted to know how I kept my house so organized and my husband so satisfied. On the other hand, there was a growing emptiness within me, a space once filled by children's laughter at school, by the small triumphs of teaching someone to read their first word. I tried filling this void with ministerial activities. One organized the women's department, created morning prayer groups, completely took over Sunday school. I worked more than when I was a teacher, but without salary, without formal recognition, without the autonomy I'd had in the classroom. All my work was an extension of Josias's ministry. I had no ministry of my own. I merely assisted his at night. While preparing Sunday school lessons or studies for the women's prayer circle, I'd observe my husband studying his sermons. Sometimes he'd ask my opinion about a passage, and in those moments I felt valued, but they were increasingly rare moments. It was on one such night about 4 months after marriage that I noticed a subtle change in Josias's treatment. I'd prepared a study about Ruth for the women's group and wanted his approval. Upon reading my text, he frowned. "You're emphasizing Ruth's independence too much, her decision to follow her own path. That's not the central lesson." "But she really made a courageous decision, leaving her homeland and following Naomi," I argued gently. Josias closed the Bible with a dull thud. "Ruth's lesson is about submission. Maria Jose's submission to God, to Naomi, then to Boaz. Not about independence." I opened my mouth to respond, but his look stopped me. It was no longer the gaze of the man who'd proposed to me with reverence. It was something different, something cold.